Long ago, in an ancient kingdom that stretched between towering mountains and endless seas, there lived two royal brothers. The elder was King Shahriar, the supreme ruler of the land. The younger was King Shah Zaman, who governed a neighboring kingdom. Though they ruled separate realms, the bond between them was stronger than blood, and the pain of being apart grew heavier with every passing year. At last, Shah Zaman decided to visit his beloved brother. But fate had other plans. As he traveled beneath the cover of night, he suddenly remembered a precious gift his queen had forgotten back at the palace. Thinking nothing of it, he quietly turned his horse around and returned. He expected silence. Instead, he found his entire world collapsing before his eyes. Hidden in the shadows of the palace garden, he watched his queen laughing among servants and slave girls. Music echoed through the night, wine flowed freely, and there, in the arms of a black slave, the woman he had trusted above all others embraced another as though the crown upon her head meant nothing at all. In that single moment, something inside Shah Zaman died. His heart begged him to believe it was only a nightmare, but his eyes could not deny the truth. Without a single word, without letting anyone know he had returned, he turned away and disappeared into the darkness. When he finally arrived at King Shahriar's palace, he was no longer the man who had begun the journey. His face had lost its color, his body carried no strength, and his soul bore a burden heavier than any crown a king could ever wear. King Shahriar saw his brother's broken spirit and believed it was nothing more than the burden of a long journey. "My brother," he said gently, "rest now. The road has exhausted you." But Shah Zaman found no peace. Sleep abandoned him, and silence became heavier than iron. No words escaped his lips, only the empty stare of a man whose soul had been shattered. Wanting to give his brother time to recover, Shahriar left the palace on a 3-day hunting expedition. Then, on the second day of his absence, fate revealed an even darker truth. As Shah Zaman stood by a palace window, his eyes wandered into the royal garden below. There, the queen herself appeared. She entered the garden accompanied by 20 maidens and 20 servants. Casting aside the robes of royalty, she dressed in a crimson gown, smiled, and called out with a single name: Masood. From between the trees emerged a towering black servant, the keeper of the royal palace. He walked toward her without fear and wrapped her in his arms as though he were the king, and she the one devoted to him. Shah Zaman stood frozen. What he had witnessed in his own kingdom had been betrayal, but what unfolded before him now was something far greater. Music filled the garden, wine was poured, laughter echoed through the palace walls, while the queen remained beside Masood, as though the crown itself had ceased to exist. The celebration continued until darkness swallowed the sky. 3 days later, King Shahriar returned from the hunt. But the man he found was not the same brother he had left behind. The sorrow had vanished from Shah Zaman's face. Color had returned to his cheeks. His strength had come back. He ate, he smiled. He looked alive once more. Shahriar frowned. "My brother, what burden consumed you before, and what miracle has lifted it today?" Shah Zaman looked into his brother's eyes and answered quietly, "I will tell you everything. But first, promise me that tomorrow you will stand where I stood, behind the window overlooking the royal garden, and witness the truth with your own eyes." The next day, King Shahriar did exactly as his brother had asked. Hidden behind the curtains, he waited in silence. Then he saw it. His queen entered the garden, removed her royal garments, called for Masood. And before his eyes, the truth unfolded exactly as Shah Zaman had described. In a single heartbeat, King Shahriar's heart shattered like glass thrown from the top of a mountain. That night, neither brother could find peace. So beneath the cover of darkness, the two kings abandoned their palaces and wandered into the wilderness, leaving their crowns behind. They crossed the endless desert until they reached the shores of the Salt Sea, where an enormous tree stood beside a spring of fresh water. Exhausted, they rested in its shade. Then, the sea began to roar. The water surged violently as a monstrous black demon emerged from the depths. His head seemed to disappear into the clouds, while his feet remained buried in the sea. Resting upon his shoulder was a great crystal chest, secured with 4 heavy iron locks. The demon placed the chest upon the ground, unlocked it, and lifted out a woman of breathtaking beauty, radiant as the full moon, with long black hair and dark, captivating eyes. Satisfied, the giant rested his head upon her lap, and within moments he fell into a deep sleep. The woman slowly looked around. Then her eyes found the 2 hidden kings. Carefully, she lifted the demon's head from her lap and gently laid it on the ground. With a subtle gesture, she beckoned the brothers to come closer. "Do not be afraid," she whispered with a sly smile. "The giant sleeps too deeply to awaken." According to the tale, she compelled each of the brothers, one after the other, to lie with her. When it was over, she took a ring from each of them and added both rings to a necklace she carried. The necklace was already filled with hundreds of rings. Holding it before them, she laughed. "These belong to hundreds of other men, and my husband has never known." Then she spoke the words that would haunt the brothers forever. Never believe that marriage, or walls, or locks can prevent betrayal. The 2 brothers left that place in stunned silence. What they had witnessed no longer seemed, in their eyes, to be the failure of a single person or even a single queen. It became the belief that would change the course of their lives forever, a belief that every act of trust would eventually end in betrayal. When the 2 brothers returned, King Shahriar was no longer the man who had left his kingdom. The betrayal he had witnessed had consumed every trace of mercy within him. By the time he crossed the palace gates, grief had hardened into rage, and rage into something far more dangerous. Without even changing from his travel clothes, his voice thundered through the royal halls. "Bring me the queen, now." Moments later, she stood before the throne, trembling with fear. She searched her husband's face for the man she had once known, but he was gone. "My lord," she whispered, "what has happened? Have I done something wrong?" Shahriar answered only with silence. He had already seen the truth with his own eyes. Within hours, judgment was carried out. The queen was stripped of her title, condemned for her betrayal, and executed by the king's command. Those who had taken part in the secret gatherings within the palace were punished as well, and the royal court was swept clean in a single, terrible day. By sunset, the palace that had once echoed with music and celebration had fallen into complete silence. Yet even after justice had been carried out, Shahriar found no peace. The wounds left by betrayal were deeper than any punishment could heal. That night, he sat alone upon his throne, staring into the darkness as though searching for answers that would never come. Hours passed before he summoned his Grand Vizier. The old minister entered the throne room with trembling steps. He had witnessed the horror that had unfolded throughout the palace, and he feared what the king might say next. When Shahriar finally spoke, his voice was cold, empty, almost emotionless. My trust has died. He paused. From this night forward, every evening you will bring me a new bride. The vizier froze. My lord. Before he could finish, the king continued. I shall marry her at sunset, and at dawn she shall die. The old minister's face turned pale. Your Majesty, please, there must be another way. But Shahriar's eyes revealed a man whose heart had already turned to stone. No woman, he said, will ever betray me again. The vizier lowered his head. He knew there was no changing the king's mind, and so the kingdom entered its darkest chapter. Night after night, another young bride was brought to the palace, and with every sunrise, another life came to an end. Days became months, months became years. Fear spread across the kingdom like a shadow. Families hid their daughters. Homes stood silent behind locked doors. The laughter that once filled the streets disappeared, replaced by whispers, tears, and prayers. Every dawn, King Shahriar watched another execution without a flicker of emotion. His heart no longer knew sorrow. It no longer knew compassion. It knew only one thing: revenge. And no one in the kingdom could imagine that the endless cycle of death would one day be challenged by a single woman named Scheherazade. The Grand Vizier walked alone through the silent streets of the capital, his steps slow and heavy. Every footstep felt like a death sentence. At last, he reached his home. Without a word, he pushed open the great wooden doors and entered the royal library, looking like a man already condemned. He sank into a silk-covered chair and buried his face in his trembling hands. Across the room, Scheherazade slowly closed the book she had been reading. Calmly, she rose to her feet and approached her father. "Father," she asked softly, "why do you look like a man who has lost all hope?" The vizier lifted his head with great effort. "The king demands another bride," he whispered. "There is no one left. If I fail him, tomorrow I shall die." Scheherazade did not flinch. Instead, she gently rested a hand upon his shoulder. "Then let me become his bride." The old man recoiled in horror. "Have you lost your mind?" he cried. "Do you wish to meet the same fate as every woman before you?" A faint smile appeared on Scheherazade's face. "If my life can spare yours, then it is a price I am willing to pay." The vizier grasped both of her hands, tears streaming down his face. "No, you are my daughter. You are the light of this house. I cannot sacrifice you." Scheherazade wiped away his tears with quiet tenderness. "You taught me that courage is measured not by fear, but by what we choose to protect. Let me do what I believe is right. I have failed to save so many, and now I cannot even save my own daughter." At that moment, a quiet sob echoed from behind a crimson curtain. Scheherazade turned. "Dunyazad, you can come out now." The younger sister stepped into the light, her eyes filled with tears. She rushed forward and threw her arms around Scheherazade. "Please don't go," she whispered. "I'm afraid I'll never see you again." Scheherazade held her tightly and smiled with remarkable calm. "Look at me." Dunyazad slowly raised her eyes. "No matter what happens, do not be afraid." "But what if you never come back?" Scheherazade gently brushed a strand of hair from her sister's face. "Then remember me with a smile, not with tears. And if fate is kind, we'll see each other again when the sun rises." The room fell silent. The Grand Vizier looked at his daughters one last time before turning toward the palace. Without another word, he walked away, carrying the heaviest burden a father could ever bear. Night had fallen. The sun disappeared behind the towering palace walls, leaving the heavens draped in black velvet. The royal drums echoed across the capital, announcing the arrival of another bride, another young woman. The great doors of the throne hall slowly opened. Scheherazade stepped inside. She wore a flowing black gown embroidered with threads of gold, as though the night sky itself had taken the form of a woman. Behind her walked her younger sister, Dunyazad, her small hands clutching the edge of Scheherazade's dress. King Shahriar rose from his throne. Never before had a bride entered his court with such calm, such fearless dignity. His voice rolled through the chamber like distant thunder. "Do you know what awaits you at dawn?" Scheherazade met his gaze without hesitation. "Yes, Your Majesty," she replied softly. "Death." She paused for a heartbeat before continuing. "But before the sunrise writes the final page of my life, grant me one night to tell you a story." For a long moment, the king said nothing. Something unfamiliar stirred behind his cold eyes. Curiosity. At last, he spoke. "Very well, you may speak until dawn." Instead of ordering his guards to escort her away, Shahriar descended the steps of his throne himself. The court watched in stunned silence. No king had ever done such a thing. Stopping before Scheherazade, he said quietly, "I will take you there myself." He extended his hand. Without fear, Scheherazade placed hers in his. Together, they left the throne room. Behind them, Dunyazad hurried to keep pace, though fear threatened to overcome her with every step. They walked through a long corridor lined with polished white marble. Bronze oil lamps cast a warm golden glow upon the walls, while pale moonlight slipped through the narrow windows, stretching their shadows across the floor like silent spirits, guiding them toward destiny. At the end of the passage stood an enormous door, carved from dark walnut wood. Shahriar slowly pushed it open. Beyond it lay the royal chamber, the room where countless brides had spent their final night, and where, with the coming dawn, fate itself would begin to change.